Class Management by Farhad Purgolafshad. The first thing to do once entering a new classroom is to establish authority. And a few things that could be done to achieve that is welcoming everyone into the class. Best to stand at the door. Greet everyone that walks in, shake hands or not, depending on the cultural values of people. You have to judge that depending on the gender. Then you take the attendance while making eye contact. Identify hot zones, buddies who are engaged verbally or by gestures. You have to be cautious of that from the very beginning. After taking the attendance, you start breaking the ice. Breaking the ice is to establish a one-to-one personal human communication and relationship with everyone in your class. There are many ways to break the ice, but this breaking the ice is a part of establishing authority. Suggestions that follow are not exhaustive. There are other options. These are just some of the suggestions and possibilities. Introduce yourself, preferably by a video or a presentation that outlines your education, experiences, etc. Best to avoid personal information about yourself. Ask the students to introduce themselves by talking about their strengths, hobbies, aspirations, and origin. State that answering their origin is optional. Be friendly, but not friends, with the students. Again, to break the ice, there is an example here. Some individual activity. You pass on some small pieces of paper to the participants, to everyone in the class, and you ask them, please identify yourselves, not by your name, rather by a fact or a statement that helps to identify you. Write that on the given pieces of paper and fold them. We collect them in a box and read them to find out who is the author of each paper. This activity actually can turn out to be a lot of fun for all present. Further on, establishing authority, explain the rules. All the important rules that apply in the function of a classroom, in the successful function of a classroom and a school. Explain that attendance is mandatory. We do not teach telepathically. You must be present for assessments. Again, further on attendance, you may face an objection or some comments, but I can learn everything by reading the textbook on my own and watching YouTube. Why to come to class? Well, we can tell this story. Jimmy was so smart. He read books on law. At the lawyers' conference, everyone thought Jimmy was a top-notch lawyer, and Jimmy read books on medicine. At the doctors' conference, everyone thought Jimmy was a top-notch doctor, but Jimmy read books on swimming, and Jimmy drowned. Another example. I have my map and GPS. I don't need a guide. Oops, it seems I'm lost in this bloody jungle. I do not need a teacher. Well, a simple activity. Offer them pieces of paper and tell them to make a frog that looks like as you see. No instructions provided. You have 10 minutes to do it. you will see that most people cannot do it. And they all ask, oh, but we need instructions. Then you offer instructions. And even with the instructions, many will not be able to bring it to the nice finish. Simple things that can provide evidence that we do need a teacher to guide us, someone experienced who has walked the path before, done this before, to guide us through difficult turns and twists. A managed class looks like this. It's not a military arrangement, but everyone's attention is forward. Everyone's attention is directed where they're supposed to be directed, to the teacher. As an example, here is an example of an unmanaged class with certain hot zones. People talking to each other, buddies, trying to gather in groups here and there, stick together. Then you have to explain the rules of communication. Of course, this slide has some spelling mistake on feedback. You can assume that this is going to be a CK. How does communication work? Communication principles are: there is a sender who is sending some information. Then there is a receiver who is to receive this information. The information is carried over a medium, a channel. In this case being the air, the zone between you and the receiver. In electronic communication, it is cables and even the air, some other mediums. And then there must be a feedback. What is the feedback? All right, I send this information to the receiver. Now, somehow from the receiver, the feedback should come back to the sender. I got it. Yes, I understood. I received the information. This requires certain conditions. Now, a two-way communication is where there is communication both ways. Sender is sender at some point, sending the information, receiver is receiving it, and then they switch roles. The receiver is sending information and sender is receiving. In this case, in a classroom, is really you are sending the information and you're waiting for a feedback. The receiver sends you a feedback. You know if the subject discussion was understood by the class or this specific person or not. And then you would readjust. You would send the information again if the feedback indicates that the information was not received properly or completely. It was not understood. So again, you receive feedback from the receiver. This is adjusted information showing perhaps a different understanding. And this process continues until you can ensure that the information that you intended to send has been correctly received and understood. In order to do this, when a sender is sending information, the receiver must be ready, must be available. If the receiver is not available, is communicating some other information with some other person around them, or it's daydreaming, or it's not there, this receiver cannot receive your information. So this is the reason and the principle behind requiring attention during the classrooms and not accepting small talk or continuous talk and chatter between the students while you are transmitting information. If you don't put this in place, you are not being able to transmit information correctly. Only a part of the class will receive, the rest will not receive the information. So how do we find whether the information was received or not? It's very simple. We can say something and then we notice someone is not paying attention. Then you would just simply ask them, what did you say? Example, teacher is saying, today we study trends in effect. Then notices two people are not paying attention, they were talking to each other, etc. Jane and Zaid, what did I say? So they're going to ask each other, what did he say? He said we built a tent in desert. Well, nothing to do with what you said. But that happens every day, all the time, within classrooms. So a student's attention to instructions is paramount importance, and has to be there. Now, sometimes in the classrooms, we notice some students, it seems that they are not paying attention, they're doodling, always drawing things on a piece of paper in front of them, are the notes. Is doodling good or bad? So you can try this as a workshop, as an exercise, an activity within this classroom workshop or classroom management workshop that you're going to offer. Give them some piece of paper, divide the class in two groups. One would receive the paper and pen and is told that they would start doodling when you start to read a passage. And this passage should be a boring passage with many names and references, and from there you could stop and ask questions from the two groups, the ones that did doodling or were involved in the doodling during the recording being played, or the ones that were not doodling. And you can see who would remember better the information and answers the questions better. Doodling examples are, as you see, many things. People choose their own doodling. They sometimes actually draw things. Now, this is related to some passage that I read during this classroom management workshop. And then certain questions are asked regarding that passage to see who remembered better the right answers. And as we practiced this, it turned out that the ones who doodled actually had a higher score of remembering and retaining the material than the ones who didn't. There was an exception where one person actually knew one of these names refers to a location in Africa and got distracted and how this thing relates here and couldn't memorize well. But that's an exception. Your passage that you choose should try to avoid that. Psychological research by Andrade et al. Showed that doodling actually helps memorization. So as teachers, we should be cautious not to consider a student who is doodling during instructions as inattentive. Of course, there are situations where the one beside them might get distracted by watching the ones who are doodling. And that is a delicate situation how to handle. But in general, you cannot assume that someone who's doodling is not paying attention and is not going to learn. Hot zones. Hot zones are where two or more students sit close to each other in order to engage in chatting and other disruptive activities during the classroom instructions. This is one of the biggest challenges and obstacles to transmitting information, transfer of information in the classroom, and successful activity and engagement of all class with the instructor or the teacher. The seating plan in each classroom must be designated by the teachers and the school authorities, and it should be redefined anytime the need arises to disperse these hot zones. So the students must be informed at the beginning of each classroom the first time that where you sit is going to be decided by the school and by the teacher of each specific class, because hot zones are not permanent. In some classroom, depending on the teacher and the relationship between the teacher and the class, the hot zones can develop or disappear. So this authority must remain with the school and the teachers in order to minimize the existence of hot zones. The students within the hot zones must be separated and seated at different areas far from each other. This is an effective remedy, and it's easier if it's done as soon as a hot zone is identified. Internet and chat. Students should not have access to the internet and chat services in the school unless their internet activity is completely controlled and restricted through automated filters that could not be bypassed, even if internet access is a part of their class activity. This includes mobile phones and other portable devices. Many problems, bullying, and conflicts among students are initiated and aggravated through chats and social media while even in the classroom, if they have access to these devices. We are speaking of maximum high school students. The situation in universities are perhaps a little different, but many times not so different. Internet and chat. Students with access to mobile phones or other similar devices are in effect not participating in the classroom activity and the instructions. Students often challenge each other through social media, some of which are seriously dangerous, such as "I dare you to," such and such. Meetings between the students and exchange of prohibited stuff inside the school are set up using chats. This necessitates the control and monitoring of the students outside the classrooms as well. Problems outside classroom. As many problematic behaviors and prohibited activities take place in washrooms, stairwells, hallways, and other sparsely monitored areas, it is adamant not to let more than one student at a time to leave the classroom. There must be security agents with authority monitoring areas outside the classrooms. Cameras must be installed. That includes inside classrooms, as during breaks, classrooms remain unmonitored. There is a lot of discussion at times, pro and con, about the existence of cameras within classrooms and within the schools. What should be understood that this is a public place. The school is a public place, even if it's a private school. And it's not a private property of the student. So they are in a public property, and they can be subjected to monitoring for security. Security always comes first. You don't want to send your child to a school where they may not be secure. You may not care if they are going to become high achievers and academically the best and etc., receive the best instruction. As long as they're safe, you're happy. Imagine the other way around. The school provides an amazing academic level and instruction, but your child's safety is not guaranteed. And they're disabled. Something happens to them, as we can see on the news. So safety first, then education. You cannot teach education to people who are not safe. The safety comes always first. Luck versus preparation. As a teacher, always understand, it applies to students equally as well. Luck favors the one who is most prepared. It is a grave error on the part of a teacher to walk into a classroom unprepared. Preparation also means sufficient knowledge of the subject. You cannot learn a subject the night before and be competent enough and comfortable enough to pass it on to other people. It rarely happens. Not that it's not possible, but it rarely happens. It's a very rare exception. You must be prepared. You must have a knowledge of the subject. And then be prepared on top of that. The students do not respect and do not engage with or outright challenge a teacher that seems unprepared and unorganized. How to engage the students? This is after you have established authority. And this engaging the students also becomes a part of establishing authority. The attention seekers. There are different types of students. There are the attention seekers. There are the recognition seekers. The don't care type, the angry, violent type. The attention seekers. They're either the neglected or the insecure. The neglected, generally neglected by family and friends, just telling them so and so, how are you doing, may be sufficient to engage them in your classroom. The insecure one, on the other hand, there's a general insecurity due to physical or mental health issues. They need frequent or regular reassurance. You can do that. You can do it. You are doing fine, but could even do better. Encouraging statements to support them and help them rise above the insecurity. With the recognition seekers, high achievers, they're ambitious. They need to prove their academic or intellectual superiority. They might challenge your knowledge of the subject. As they thrive on challenge, give them something challenging, preferably as a group team activities. If they become too much of a problem, because some could be quite arrogant, then you can bring them to the board and challenge them on the board. It's not a very good practice because you're embarrassing the people in front of others, and this may not have a totally positive reaction. It all depends on how well you have established the authority in the classroom and your rapport with the students, even the ones who are challenging you. The don't care type, they are very difficult to deal with. They have emotional distress, and they don't care type is because of the emotional distress they're going through. Needs counseling to find the source of distress. Do not create more distress intentionally on them. The don't care type could be because of intellectual impairment. They just find the material overwhelming. They cannot follow. Again, needs counseling to identify and address the impairment. Try giving simpler tasks. This don't care type may be a sign of apathy syndrome or apathy syndrome. Needs counseling for further investigation. The violent type. Violence could be caused by a history of being victimized, ADHD, or other learning disabilities, drug abuse, high emotional distress, social cognitive deficit, and low IQ. Watch for early signs of anger. Prevent escalation. If possible, ask for help. Refer to counseling. Team activity. Now another team activity here. You divide the class into groups and teams. Your task is to answer the following questions. The first group that has the most correct or better answers to the question wins. What is always in front of you but can't be seen? Can be touched but can't be reached? What goes up but never comes down? What can you catch but not throw? What starts with an E, ends with an E, but only contains one letter? What is as light as a feather, but even the world's strongest man couldn't hold it for more than a minute? These are some brain teasers, and the internet is full of them. You can even conceive of them yourselves. And there are fun activities and really challenging, amusing for all participants. And these are the ways that you actually are establishing authority and connecting and engaging with the class on the first days that you are there